Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode. And normal service has resumed. Last time, Stephen didn't come up with the idea. It was me, but this time it's back to Stephen. And we were talking about values. So, without any further information from me, why on earth did you bring up values? Hit me.
You know what I'm like? There's always a bugbear, isn't there, in my locker? And values has been a bit of a bugbear for me. And where it goes is like this, we have company values with some of the business we work with, and then as an individual will have their own personal values. And my challenge is that you talk to so many companies, so many individuals, and they don't know what their values are. They're written somewhere and someone had the foresight to go, yeah, these would be some great values for the business, and no one remembers them. So my challenge is then is, well, how do you live by values that you don't remember, and why set yourself values that actually you don't believe in? Because if you believed in them, you would remember them, because it would be almost like they're part of you, right? It
Yeah.
ends up being something that becomes every day. And I guess the personal values is one thing, but company values, I guess someone comes up with them and then says, these are our values. So then my challenge is almost like, is that the right way in the first place? Should values be built from the bottom up? And is that why people don't know the values? Because actually they're not built right in an organization. And I had one organisation that had one particular value, and I won't go into any detail because I don't want that company to know that I'm talking about them. But what was clear was they set a value that they knew they could not meet, but they still set the value in the hope that maybe they may meet it, which totally blew my mind.
Yeah, that is disappointing. That's not probably unique, is it? Sadly, I thought when you talked about this, it immediately sprung me back to a business networking event. In the days when I went to lots of business networking events, there was a big local firm that had just done its corporate strategy, and it set out the room in a lovely venue like you. I'm not going to mention any specific details, and it's probably not easy to pinpoint because I doubt they're the only ones who've done this, but they had lovely circular tables, and they had tables of 10 people on it and all their guests, and on each table they'd have a partner of the firm and one of the management, and they'd be talking about their values, and we'd had a big session on it, and how they were telling us how they'd just been done their big corporate strategy. And then the manager, bless them, had the front to say, "Oh, I'm not sure I quite fully align with the strategies, with the values, because I've not read them in detail, and I certainly couldn't read them off now." And the partner slapped his hand down on the table very firmly and said, "Well, that's not acceptable. We've just spent a lot of money on this corporate strategy. You've all had access to it. Why don't you know the values inside out?" And I had to interject. Probably didn't go well for them later, but I had to interject because I was just like, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. You in your big ivory tower at the top there telling everybody how they're going to value something isn't how it works, because if that person doesn't value the thing that you're saying you valued, well, that they shouldn't have to compromise that just so they can work for you. And more importantly, if you don't know what people in your organization value, then shame on you, because all I can see now is you spent tens of thousands of pounds, maybe more, producing a completely pointless, very pretty document which you're calling a corporate strategy, which has values in it which are words on a page that don't actually align to anything, but they look nice to your clients, and they might well attract your clients, or your clients expect to have it. I honestly, what the hell are you doing here? And we ended up having a bit of a debate. I should have, being a coach, I should have handled that better. But I was just so angry for the manager, who was like, no, 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 the manager's, in my head, the manager's 100% right. Because if that's how they feel, that's how they feel. You can't shake them around and say, no, we've spent money on this thing. It's great. Believe in them. And your answer is, all the successful companies do it from the ground up because they ask, they at least consult and make these the people who work with them feel connected to it. I mean, there's a really cool book. I don't know if you've heard of Daniel Pink and Drive, and that's a really really good book about the motivation of people. So if you don't believe in that, I would challenge you to read or listen to the book Drive by Daniel Pink, which will talk to you about people's motivation. Because if you're setting values and your staff aren't engaged, let me tell you right now, you have a lot of demotivated people who are sleepwalking through work. So you won't notice that they're not performing that well, but they're definitely not giving you anywhere near as much as they could be. And this is the thing that makes me smile. You know, you're dealing with companies who are doing all these things for efficiency and profit and to make this a great place to work and become an incredible company, but they're not doing the basics. It's insane. So when I heard you talk about values, it took me right back to that traumatic experience. But unfortunately, I don't think it's a one-off. So, I mean, you do a lot more work with companies and the wider teams than I do more one-on-one coaching. So this must happen to you a lot.
Yeah, it does. It totally does. And I think what this podcast is really trying to highlight is it's the thought mechanism that goes in beforehand. It's the work that you do beforehand, before those values are released. It's that internal work that gets done in order that everyone buys into it. And also, if you think about the world right now, and I'll just pick one out of the hat. So you think about people that suffer with autism. Okay, how does a company support that person with their values? Because this is what it then comes down to, doesn't it? It's how do you support people in your organization with your values? So this is why I think it really needs a lot more time and more thought going into this, because fundamentally you then have to deliver it and you have to live by it. And I think that's the challenging bit as well, Oliver, is, company values, that company has to live by those values. And and that's not just from external, in terms of external comms. That's about internal communications as well as external communications. It's about when we go out to recruit, do those values sit center point of the people we're trying to attract into our organization? When we're representing our brand or our business, are those values at the forefront of what we're doing, or are those values just words on a sheet of paper that we shuffle around sometimes? I do think it's a real, because it's trendy at the moment, isn't it? Come on, it's like a buzz thing, It's like, yeah, we've got a set of values, and that we've got a set of values in our business, but what do those values truly mean? And also the question is we might have an idea of value, but we might not be able to hit that value. So let's be honest, and say, actually, this is where we would like to get to, rather than, oh yeah, this is the value and we're all doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of things look, not just values, but a lot of things in general can look great on paper, can't they? But it's also, we were talking about it earlier. We don't want it to just sound like it's corporate and company bashing. We're talking about individual values as well. That point about, well, what does it mean first and foremost, and what are our values? Not you and I, although I'm happily talk about it. But if we were able to sit down and talk about it, we would know what they were. But I wonder how many people have actually sat down, because they will have them. They will have values. But if they don't, if they don't sit down and think about it, they probably won't ever realise them. It's a bit like with the work we do. Everybody has natural abilities, natural talents that they potentially lose connection with. And I think it's the same, that your values will be there somewhere. And that's the thing that I would implore both of individuals, but also businesses, to explore that properly. And of course, use external companies. I don't have a problem with that. I think there's some out there who do a really good job of doing that. But you have to engage everyone. If you're not engaging everyone, then why are you bothering, other than to have some sort of glossy document? But also for people, there will be things out there in the world that you see that appall you. And there will be things out there in the world that you really, really like. Well, actually, I think we might be getting close to what your values are. So I bet a lot of people listening here wouldn't be able to quickly, if we pulled them right live on now, tell me your 4 values in a closed environment. We wouldn't do it in front of people. I bet they wouldn't know. I bet they have them, and I bet they'd be able to think about it. But isn't it crazy that, you talk about values being trendy, but no one really knows them? And obviously, hats off to those who do. Hats off to individuals who know exactly what they stand for and can articulate it and repeat it. And hats off to companies who've got this right and all the way down, because you're smashing it. That will have so much more impact than you possibly realize, but also in your life as an individual, so much more impact than you now realize, because if you are in that position, you don't realize how powerful they are. But obviously, if you don't have either of those things, a real big challenge to say to you and I'm not saying that you need to have like a 10-word sentence to define them, but just a good idea of what they are, because without them and without really knowing them and connecting them, it can send us down wrong directions, which then challenge our values. And we've talked in the past about what you can tolerate, and you can tolerate a lot more than you think that is offline with what your beliefs are. And in this case, we're talking about values. So if you don't know them absolutely clearly, it may take you a long way down that path before you're like, hang on a minute, no, this is too far. But actually too far was probably like 2 years ago when you first took that step down this path. So no, I thought that was a really, really cool one, actually, from that point of view. But more on the personal one, because you obviously work with a lot of senior executives on an individual basis as well, not just companies. How does that relate to them when you're having your early conversations?
Yeah, I wanted to share with you like one of my values before we go on to that, because the other side to this sometimes as well, your values come into they get challenged, and sometimes you might be called into doing something that you don't feel comfortable with because it doesn't sit well with your values. So one of my values is about I call it 24/7, and basically that value is being myself 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week. And that's about bringing my own flavor, bringing me to any situation, whether that's personal or business, because I feel that I'm more authentic because of that. And I'm more confident and comfortable with who I am because of that. If I try to not be myself and be someone else, that's when I get nervous. That's when the anxiety kicks in. That's when I fluff my lines. That's when I don't feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes what happens as well is our values get challenged, but we need to be confident enough to be able to say, well, actually, this is a value that I feel passionate about, and actually, I'm not going to change that to suit you, I'm afraid, because actually this is me. And I think that's so important. And a lot of people now, that might resonate. And I would go, oh gosh, yeah, I can resonate with that. So that's what values are. And it is. Values are a set of words or principles or things that you live your life by, that allow you to do the things that you want to do. And I think we all have those things. So that's from my personal perspective. And I guess a lot of the people that I work with, sometimes they can't always articulate what the values is, but it's a feeling. So sometimes values are a feeling, a feeling of, well, I want to feel clear of mind. So one of your values might be that actually health is really important to you. So that might be one of your values, and you might do a number of things that help you feel better, whether that's your nutrition, whether that's exercise, whether that's meditation, whatever it is. But it's not until you sometimes stop and think. And remember, we've talked about this before, about what this whole space is about. And sometimes it's about stopping and thinking about, what is it that I actually enjoy doing? What is it that makes me happy? And it really, and we've talked about this before in other podcasts, but values sometimes get challenged because someone else is encroaching on something that you feel passionate about and trying to poo-poo it or change it. And I would say a lot of people resonate with that.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. It's when you look at things as well, and especially now, maybe if you've listened to this podcast, you're suddenly thinking, oh, yeah, maybe hang on a minute. And that's the moment. Are you being asked to do things that don't feel right? That they should be alarm bells. They shouldn't be. Again, we talk about a lot of this all crosses over, doesn't it? And we talk about tolerance a lot. How much are you being asked to tolerate beyond what is okay with you? The likelihood is that some of your values are being attacked. even though you didn't realize it. Because I think I really like that idea of the fact that it can be a feeling. Therefore, you've probably never spoken it in a sentence or words. You certainly never put it down on a little brochure or something like that. But what you're finding is that natural value is being challenged, and maybe it's been challenged quite a lot. And I would implore people to think long and hard about that, because maybe one of the reasons that you have frustration and stresses and things like that is linked directly to the fact that what you're being asked to do by a company or a friend, family member, is really challenging your values. It's something we should always pay much more attention to, and I think it's one of those things that gets glossed over, which is why I think in the company environment it's very easy for them to just put up a set of values that they've spent a few days or a few weeks or whatever developing, and just thinking, oh, that'll do, because that all looks right. No one would want to not be that thing. But actually, do they then walk the talk, right? You know what I mean? Do they actually do what they say? And that's the challenging thing, because they may wish to, but they may have set up a company and a culture that doesn't actually enable it. So in the heat of the moment, when you're going for a really cool exercise, creating your values, at that time, your natural innate self is fully connected with that. That's the thing we're talking about. So you, as a company, could come up with some really cool values, but then outside that environment, outside that safe space, the normal stuff that you've actually set up and the culture you've got kicks in, and you're unable to do it. So I genuinely believe that most of the time when they're released as values in companies, they're believed in. But I also think they're set up in a slightly fake environment because they're quite concentrated. And obviously, if they haven't engaged with the staff around the company, they risk not being real enough anyway. But if also, as soon as you step out of that environment, you have to be this different person because you're not working towards your values, then that's quite interesting as well, because I think often their true values do come out of those meetings, but they haven't set the environment for them to flourish. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And the word I wrote down was conflict. So I think sometimes what happens is your personal values and the values that the business have set might be in conflict. And sometimes, we've talked about this before, that sometimes is around, so then that impacts the culture. So sometimes you then have to make a decision around, where is that right for you?
Hmm.
So is that environment right for you? Are those values that you can live by or feel comfortable with? So there can be that conflict. And I think that's sometimes where people go, do you know what? This is not for me anymore. And that might be because the culture has changed in that environment and it doesn't sit well with your values. And, there's a saying, isn't there, about your gut sometimes.
Yes.
And you often hear people say, listen to your gut.
Mm.
And I think sometimes values sit in our gut. And that's why we get that weird feeling sometimes about things, is because it's in our gut. And it's sometimes maybe we haven't, said them out loud, but it's a feeling. It's something that, we know it doesn't feel right. And that's our gut telling us sometimes that actually it's not right. And I think that conflict is where the challenge sometimes comes for individuals, Oliver, because the reality is, if you're in conflict, if your values are in conflict with your company values, that's why it doesn't sit right.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sit right because you're in conflict. And I think that really resonated when you said what you said. And which then brings us back to almost like the full circle around, and we want to try and keep these podcasts to our normal kind of 20 minutes if we can, but I just want to finish off here. And that has become full circle, which is around saying to ourselves, when we are creating values in a company, that's why we have to get everybody involved, because that way you get a much more holistic and rounded view of the values first. And you might even get to a point where it's like, actually, we can't have that value in an organization because that value, we're just not ready for that value right now. It might be something we can come back to later on, or we might even say, actually, we've missed something here. We've actually missed something that's really vital and really important.
Absolutely. And as an additional thing, which I think is implied by what you're saying, but just to ram it home, especially if you're a business leader thinking of taking this advice on board, it has to be in a safe space. People need to be able to say what they need to say and no recriminations for having said it, because if they said it, there's got to be something behind it. And they need to feel, and again, if you don't have that, you need to have a little bit of self-reflection, look in the mirror and find out why on earth that is. Because I often meet people who think they have one thing in a culture but have something very different when you get involved in the private conversations with people who, when they know they're in a confidential environment, it's been proven safe. The things that I get told versus what I'm hearing from management don't always align very closely at all. Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. So I think hopefully it hasn't caused a lot of trauma for people, but I think it's relevant to anyone, and it doesn't have to have been in a business environment. I know we've ended up using that because it's a more straightforward example, but I think it comes to families as well. Friendship groups, all these sorts of things. You can kind of replace what we've said. I'm sure you won't do corporate strategies for friendship groups, but in principle, there might be times when you're going to places or doing things or having conversations, or certain things are being said that you're just not comfortable with, and trust that gut. Don't be led by it, but don't ignore it. There is something there, and all you need to do is use that as a trigger, I believe, to listen a bit more to why you're getting that feeling, whether of discomfort or whatever it might be. So no, I really like that one. For me, I think we've covered enough on that one. So I don't know if you want to just sign off with any further thoughts, but for me, I think that's a really good one to bring up. Thanks, Stephen.
No, no, you're welcome. And all I would say is, if this has triggered anything in anyone or any business, reach out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, because it will trigger people differently, and it
Yeah.
is quite a it's quite a notable subject at the moment, and I
Mm.
think it will continue as companies start, continue to work on their culture, and that's what the value should be really all about. And I think that's the bit that might be missing. But no,
Yeah.
great session.
Lovely. Thanks again, Stephen. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Speak soon.
Bye now.